question number one, I said, which statistic bothered you the most and why? I think the statistic that bothered me the most was that 66% of millennials say they don't know what Auschwitz was, and that is closely or maybe equally as sad as 22% of people have never heard of the Holocaust at all. Those two statistics are disturbing and sad at the same time because there's no reason 22% of people should have never heard of the Holocaust, and the 66% of the millennials that said they've never heard of Auschwitz, it shows that they don't have a very good education about the Holocaust at all, because the fact that Auschwitz was one of like the most known concentration camps during the Holocaust. So if you've never heard about Auschwitz, then you don't have that great of an education, in my opinion, that is, of what the Holocaust was and what the people that went through actually had to suffer through. And as far as my education on the Holocaust is, I think that I have an above average education on the Holocaust, mainly because throughout high school, each history class that I had took around 2 weeks to hit solely on the Holocaust and like different angles about different, like the different camps and everything that people went through. And also last year, I took a course that was specifically on World War II, and it was a whole semester pretty much talking about the Holocaust and breaking down the war in general, which taught me a lot of things that I didn't already know. And after that, and seeing the statistics about people who have never heard of it, never heard of Auschwitz, I think that would make me believe that I have a above average education on the Holocaust, especially among other millennials. And what are 5 new facts that I learned about the Holocaust? The first concentration camp was opened in March of 1933. I didn't know that. I didn't know the camps opened that early, and they were holding homosexuals, political prisoners, criminals, and Jehovah's Witnesses. I didn't know that. I mean, I didn't think that the concentration camps were, I didn't think they started up until a couple years after that. The second fact that, like, they always discuss how Jews are targeted in the Holocaust, but they never really say why. Like, why Hitler went after Jews. That's not, like, no one in none of my classes has that ever been, like, specified, oddly enough. But the fact that Hitler said that the Jews were considered a race whose goal was world domination, and the stereotype of the Jew, they stereotyped Jews as Christ killers. Those are 2 quotes from the text, and both of those things are like, those were the reasonings, and that's just, I did not know. Did all Germans support Hitler? There were no like large scale protests or people speaking out against the prosecution of Jews and everyone who was put into the concentration camps, which I didn't like. I knew that not everyone supported the decision, because that's like it is today. Like, no one is going to have 100% support in anything they do. Like, there's always going to be people that don't agree with their opinions and don't think what they're doing is correct. So I knew Hitler didn't have 100% support, especially with the stuff that he was doing. But I thought that there would be some sort of protest or some people, like groups speaking, like saying, this isn't right, we shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this, you're crazy. The fourth one was, did allies and people of the free world know what was going on? they did know what was going on because apparently everything was made public through like the press. And that makes me think like, okay, if other countries knew what was going on and other superpowers knew what was like super nations knew what was going on, then why did they wait so long to step in? Like, why did they let this stuff happen, and why did they let this escalate to the point to where they did step in? And another thing that's not really talked about a lot was what Hitler's like ultimate goal was. And of course it was to create the Aryan race and the Aryan Empire and everything. But the underlying goal of it was so German farmers could have enough land. And that also just blew my mind because all of this, all the Holocaust, all the death was boiled down to a super race and farmland. It's questionable. For number 3, I believe this one was where we had to watch the video. Yeah, we had to watch the army footage. And what image affected me the most? The image that affected me the most was around 20 minutes into the video when the Allies were digging up the mass graves for the autopsies and just pulling bodies on top of bodies out of each one. And then it later says how they buried around 20 people in a single grave, which was also just horrifying. And seeing like the condition of the bodies as they were being pulled out of the graves, because the graves were still somewhat fresh apparently because the bodies hadn't decayed that much, and there was no like proper treatment done to the bodies to keep them from decaying, so clearly they weren't in that great a condition. But that was just horrifying. And the non-image of the film that affected me the most was whenever they were talking to the people that were in the camps. One of them was like the head nurse, and I forget what the other one was. I think he was like an officer or something, that was talking about how they killed a lot of people with morphine overdoses, and they never even checked to see if the people were actually dead before they buried them. People could have survived the morphine and would have been fine, but they were buried alive if they did survive, and they would have never known because they were taken straight from after they were injected and buried thinking that they were dead, but they never even checked, which is horrifying. Discuss why it may be important for average people to watch the trials. The number one reason I think it's important that everyone should watch that specifically is that it's a huge part of world history. It should be remembered and it should never be forgotten. Everybody should know what it was. There should never be that 22% from earlier that has never heard of the Holocaust. That should never happen. That's sad on our education. The second thing is people need to know that it wasn't just Jewish people who were killed in the Holocaust. Like, yes, there was millions and millions of Jews, and that was the main, like, people who were targeted. But people who didn't fit into the Aryan race of Hitler were also prosecuted and put in these camps for no reason, even if they weren't Jewish. And the third thing that everyone should know and, like, should see by watching these trials is that, like, they should know that the people that did survive and like that were liberated, a lot of them still didn't make it, even though that they were rescued, they had medical treatment, they were being helped, they still didn't make it. Like, so many people died after they were saved just because the condition their body was in, they just couldn't go back to eating normal food. They said at one point, once they were rescued, the normal food was too rich for them and they had to eat it with a stew of grass to like dilute it down to where they could eat it and their bodies wouldn't be hurt by it. Number 4, 5 new facts about the concentration camp badges. And what topic did you find especially interesting, and what did you learn? Um, I didn't know that the camps had markings to identify between all the different people and all the different groups. Mainly, I didn't think they cared enough. I mean, with the treatment, clearly they didn't care about who they were or their personalities or anything along those lines. So why would they distinguish between them? And the second thing, the homosexual community adapted the upside down pink triangle for later on for gay rights, which I think that was a cool little spin that they did with it. I mean, it was a terrible thing, but taking the bad and making it into something good, I mean, that's always something to win with. Number three, the collar of the badge they were wearing utterly determined the treatment of the prisoners. Even though they were all treated badly, some were treated worse than others, such as the people who were already convicted of crimes, or people that were a part of the homosexual community. They were treated worse just because of the lifestyle they lived. And for four, the triangles are used on post-war memorials, to the victims. Personally, I mean, for a memorial, I don't think the upside down triangles was the best idea, because I feel like the victims of that, the people who survived it, they would want to move past it. They wouldn't want to look at the upside down triangles that almost had them killed. But at the same time, it's like the pink triangle, taking the bad and making something good out of it. And five, they had different classifications for everybody, yet pedophiles and rapists had a pink triangle just the same as a homosexual man did. And someone who was a pedophile or someone who was a rapist shouldn't fall in the same category as a homosexual. Even at the time in Germany, that was against the law. Those crimes, being a pedophile and being a rapist, are literally the worst things that human can be. And the topic that I chose to explore more in depth was the Black Triangle women. It included lesbians, unmarried mothers, and women who had an abortion. It shouldn't matter. And at the time, I understand it was different. And I'm glad that today's world has realized that it doesn't matter. But for one, how would they know the backstory? Say an unmarried mother, maybe it was a widowed mother. It doesn't specify whether that was different or not, but if it's a widowed mother, technically they're unmarried and they still have a child. And if a woman had an abortion, how would they know that she had an abortion? I don't know. That just didn't make sense to me. And it said that at the time, gay men were prosecuted, and if they were found guilty, they were sent to prison for being gay. And they wanted to make lesbianism a criminal offense because it didn't prevent normal sexual behavior, is what the article said. I don't know. It didn't really make sense to me. The survivor I chose to watch the interview on was Joseph Schern, I think is how it's pronounced. He was born in October of 1910, in Hungary. He was a Catholic, and his father was a Nazi, and he went on to become a Jehovah's Witness after he served in the military. Whenever he turned 18, he was recruited from the military and joined and served 2 years under Hitler. He was arrested and punished while he was in the military because he said that what they were doing was wrong and they shouldn't have done it, which was interesting because it shows that there was some people that said this isn't right, we shouldn't be doing this. And after he got out of the military and released and everything, he became a Jehovah's Witness and was later on picked up, and he was sent into 2 different concentration camps. I cannot pronounce either one of them, but the first one he was put into in 1940, and he described the torture and everything they went through and like the treatment. And he was explaining one story as they were eating, and one of the officers came up and took the cup out of one of his friends at the time's hand and threw it towards the fence and told him to go get it. And whenever he went to get it, they shot him and said that he was trying to escape. And then he took another cup and threw it and told another person to go get it, and they said no. And they told him that if he didn't go get it, he would be shot for disobeying orders. So the person had to get up and go and get it, and then they shot at his feet as he came back because he was, quote unquote, trying to escape. And it just talks about how the people were so, like, how the officers treated the people so poorly. And then he was transferred to another camp that I also cannot pronounce the name of, where turned out his cousin was in the same concentration camp. And on the day he arrived, he walked into, like, he got off the truck that he had been taken there in, and he was walking, and he watched the officers taking people in the camp and drowning them in the toilets that they were allowed to use while they were supposed to be cleaning them. The people were on their knees cleaning the toilets, and the officers came up behind them and pushed their head down in the water until they drowned. And the last thing he touched on was how the people that were in the camp, the triangles didn't matter, so the person's background didn't matter, which was kind of like that survival instinct, I guess, because at the time, yeah, it was, in Germany anyways, it was against the law to be gay and stuff like that. But in the camp, people like who had the pink triangle and were homosexual, like, that nobody cared except for the officers. The actual people that were in the camp, the prisoners, they didn't care. They were all just trying to survive together. And he said that him specifically, he put a big emphasis on how he wore a purple triangle, which was Jehovah's Witness specifically wore, and he said that Jehovah's Witnesses are nice to everybody. And he talked about the Bible. They tried to have Bible study, or they tried to have a religious meeting on Sundays, and one of the officers came up to them and told them to go back in their barracks if they wanted to do that, like, to go ahead, but if they did it out there, they would be shot. And he was like trying to warn them. From what the man in the interview said, was like he was actually trying to help them because he didn't want them to be shot. He didn't want them to be injured. And number 6, The Reader's Guide of Beatrice and Virgil. And how did it impact, or what did Yann Martel say that impacted you the most, and why? And what did Martel say here that you think is important to remember, and why? The thing that impacted me the most was the background research she did before writing a fictional book. The book is, it's a fictional novel, yet she says that she read over 80 books and visited Auschwitz 3 times, her last visit staying for 2 weeks. She did so much background research to write a fictional book explaining the Holocaust from a different angle. And that's one thing that a lot of people don't realize. And she did all of this. She read the book. She went to Auschwitz all those times, spent so much time there before she ever wrote a word of Beatrice and Virgil, is what it said. And the thing that stuck with me is she said that she wants people, when they put on their shirt or see a red cloth or eat a pear or see a donkey or a monkey, she wrote the book so when people see these things, it'll trigger the Holocaust. It'll make people think, which I really like that she did that, because apparently, I did not know this, but apparently the Holocaust is being faded from people's memories, which is a terrifying thought. And that needs to happen. Like, people need to know about the Holocaust. People need to learn about the Holocaust. People need to prevent anything along those lines from happening ever again. And I think, like, I like how she did the book. I like how she did the imagery and how she was trying to make people remember the Holocaust off certain triggers that aren't necessarily attached to the Holocaust, like a pear is not attached to the Holocaust, or a shirt, or a red cloth, or a donkey. None of that's tied to the Holocaust. Yet, for me, every time I see one from now on, like, I'll think of the Holocaust because of the book, which is very nice.